Welcome, Rob. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Bernadette.
Thank you. So we're going to be talking about soul plans and this area of specialty and expertise that you have around between lives regressions. So maybe we could start with what is a regression, full stop, because there'll be some people that will have an idea about that and some people maybe it's brand new, fresh new. So can you just tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, a regression is a process that you go through in hypnosis that slows down your brain waves. So the normal waking state is what is called a beta brainwave. And then if you slow it down somewhat, which you can do simply by closing your eyes, that will take you to alpha brainwaves. And then when you go through a hypnotic induction in a regression, that should take you to probably deep alpha or light theta. That's the trance state. And in that state, in a between lives regression like I do, that allows the client to speak directly with non-physical beings, in particular, what we call their council of elders. These are the wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee their personal evolution. So when you're in that kind of a trance state, you can talk to your council, ask them literally any question about your life, and if it's for your highest good, get an answer.
Okay, that's super exciting, right? And so this is a process where you are putting yourself in a state where you can communicate through your six senses with the dimension where to open up the ability to connect for that communication. It's because our brainwave we're so in our mind and we're so active when we're in beta stage, right? That we're not aware of that connection.
Yeah, by the way, the brainwave theory for how hypnotic inductions work is just that. It's a theory. We know that the brainwaves slow down, but I don't think anybody has ever conclusively proven that that's the mechanism of action, so to speak. And there are other theories about how regressions work. This is just the theory that I subscribe to.
Yeah, and it resonates with you, obviously, from all the years you've been doing it. Would you mind explaining how you came to this work? Like, how on earth do you become a between lives regressionist? What brought you to this in the first place?
Well, what happened in my case is that I had a spiritual awakening at the age of 40, which we can talk more about if you want to. But that led me to leave the corporate world where I had been for a number of years, write my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And then a few years after that, the second book, Your Soul's Gift, came out. And then right around the time Your Soul's Gift was coming out, I decided to take the training to do between lives regressions. And I trained with somebody who was trained by Michael Newton, who is the person who back in the 1990s founded the entire field of between lives regressions. The reason I took that training from the moment my first book came out, and then for a number of years until I took the training, I got so many emails from people all over the world saying exactly the same thing. What is my pre-birth plan? And for all those years, I wrote back and answered each email the same way. I said, I'm not a medium, I'm not a channel, I don't know what your pre-birth plan is. If you want to know that, work with one of the mediums or channels in my books. But then I found out about between lives regressions, and I thought, well, here is a process I can do myself that will allow people to speak to their counsel, get the answers directly. You don't have to go through a medium or channel anymore. And that, I think, is the best way to go about finding out about your pre-birth plan.
I agree. And I think that's really powerful because it puts the person in the seat of the experience and of communication. It's not being done to them or for them. It really is very empowering. Right. I'm all for those kinds of modalities that allow people to be the lead on their team and interacting, experiencing it firsthand. I love also that life brought you to the point of doing that because so many people were asking you the same question and then seeing this opportunity to do it. That's so awesome. I would love to know what in your synopsis version of your spiritual awakening led you to break free of whatever your life was before and then to write the book about your soul's plan before you'd even started doing regressions.
Yeah, what happened was I was in the corporate world for many years, basically doing corporate writing, marketing, communications, which I did not enjoy at all. I had the feeling that, if I were just to suddenly disappear for some reason, my clients would just put somebody else into that position and carry right along. They wouldn't even care that I was gone. But at the same time, I had this feeling that I had come to Earth to do something in particular, but I didn't know what it was. And actually, I didn't even know how to figure out what it was. And so there were a couple of false starts. I mean, I went for career counseling, took the Myers-Briggs. That was interesting, but it didn't tell me what to do with my life. And then I went to all my friends and family and said, you know, what do you think I should do with my life? Which it turns out is not a good question to ever ask another person. The answers were really not very helpful. And so I thought, well, I'm really not getting anywhere here. What can I do to figure out what I should be doing with my life? And this idea came to me, go see a psychic medium. Knowing what I know now, I have to believe that my spirit guides were whispering this idea in my mind. But at that time, I didn't even know what a spirit guide was. I thought it was my own brilliant idea, and it made sense. I thought, you know, it's only an hour of my time, a little bit of money. If nothing comes out of it, there's no harm done. So I go into this session with the medium. This is back in 2003. And right away, she says to me, your spirit guides are here. And I said, what is a spirit guide? So she explained that. And then she said, your guides would like to speak directly to you. And she started to channel them. And the very first thing they said was, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. Well, I just shook my head and I said, why in the world would I have done that? And they said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Now, I probably would have dismissed all of this as some kind of delusion on my part, except that the guides then launched into this very lengthy and detailed monologue in which they told me why I had planned all my challenges. And what was really impressive is that they knew what all of my challenges had been without me telling them anything about myself, nor had I told the medium anything prior to the session. So as you can imagine, if you're talking to beings who know literally everything about you without you saying anything, it gives them a lot of credibility. So they went through this detailed explanation of why I had planned my challenges. And I came out of that session with my mind blown wide open. And I thought about this constantly, thought about it. And what happened was that it really created quite a deep healing for me, because it allowed me for the first time to see deeper meaning to the most difficult things that had happened. And then I thought, well, if this perspective can create this kind of healing for me, surely it can create a similar kind of healing for other people. That was when I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. And then within just a couple of weeks of the session with the medium, I had this spiritually transformative experience where I was doing nothing more than walking down the street in the middle of the afternoon. And I had an experience in which every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, divine, unconditional love would wash over me. That's how I describe it, but those words don't even come close to conveying what was actually happening. This was a transcendent experience. And I understood intuitively that it was my soul saying to me, this love is who you really are. Now, what I didn't know at that time was why this was happening. That I figured out a couple of years later, because a couple of years later, after I'd looked at a number of pre-birth plans for my first book, every single plan I looked at was always based on unconditional love for every person involved. So that experience walking down the sidewalk confirmed to me what I was finding in the research, that we are beings made from unconditional love, and that the life plan is always based on unconditional love.
Beautiful. And when I read your second book, which I'd stumbled across at a point in my life where it was very much needed and very comforting, it's remarkable that you tackle such challenging life topics about how those are part of our pre-birth plan, but also to look at topics that are so raw and so deeply painful and challenging from the perspective of one, pre-birth planning, which is just like for some people is so difficult to wrap their minds around because there's so much pain associated, but then to be able to look at them from a lens of love and see where love fits as an underlying lesson or opportunity in that is really game changing for your life. And I think that's where what your work that you do and all the work I've seen around pre-birth planning and understanding your soul journey brings such a completely different perspective to your life that brings you peace like nothing else.
Well, it does. And the main way in which it brings people to a place of peace is that if they're in a state of victim consciousness, it will pull them out of victim consciousness. Once you know that you yourself planned your biggest challenges, you're no longer a victim. Now, not everybody is ready for that.
Yes.
There are a lot of secondary benefits to being a victim. You get attention. It's a way to bond with other people who see themselves as victims. And I say that with total non-judgment. That, I think, is a very natural human reaction to life challenges. The problem becomes if you get stuck there for a long time, that is a really painful way to go through life. You don't want to spend any more time there than you have to. So pre-birth planning will pull you out of victim consciousness. Even if you don't know why you plan your challenges, just knowing that you plan them will have that effect. If you then come into some understanding of why you plan them, which is what I talk about in my books,
yes,
that's even better, because then you can go about learning those lessons in a much more conscious and much less arduous manner.
Yes, less arduous, less painful way, indeed. And I think when you first hear this concept of I pre-planned one relationships, one opportunities, personality, whatever it might be, and challenges, that I planned my challenges and then you look at what's happened to you, can make you really angry and rageful at yourself. Like, why would I do that? Or if you have a belief in a higher power, higher beings, God, creator, universe, I've seen people get very angry at the source of life for that, but that doesn't last too long before you drop into, what if there is some truth to this? Then what am I really being asked to do? And I don't want suffering, so I have to go forward with this, right? Because the alternative is you stay in anger and rage and pain and suffering about it. So I think it's really powerful work for anyone who's listening and who's wanting healing from the past in particular, or with present challenges, to explore your work in your books, because it's really super enlightening. It shifts your consciousness completely. Well, then, do you want to tell me about the difference between a past life regression and between lives regressions, and why you've chosen to do between lives regressions?
Well, actually, I used to offer both, and then I stopped offering past life regressions for several reasons. One, it's not my particular mission. It's a little bit off topic for me. Two, the between lives regression is a much deeper, richer, informative healing experience. And three, the between lives regression actually contains an abbreviated past life within it. So if you do a between lives, you're getting the benefits of both. The process in a between lives, it starts with some preliminary steps to help people relax physically and mentally. Then I guide the person or the group, if we're doing it in a workshop, into a past life. It's almost always a past life that had a big impact on the plan for the current lifetime. You experience several different scenes in the past life, the last of which is the death scene. The portion of your consciousness that is having the experience leaves the body in the death scene and crosses back over to the other side, which I realize might sound a little bit ominous, but it's actually very easy and gentle. When you get back to the other side, most likely you will be greeted by a spirit guide, although it could be a deceased loved one, an angel, a figure of spiritual significance to you. Whoever it is that greets you, you talk to them briefly. You ask, why was I shown that past life? Why is it important to know about it at this time? And how did it affect the plan for my current lifetime? And then you ask whoever you're talking to take you to your council of elders. Now, if you're doing it as a private session with me alone, you would have filled out an intake form where you put all your questions for the council. That way you don't have to remember all of them in the middle of the process, and I just prompt you to ask them. If we're doing it as a group in an online workshop, then I have a very long set of questions that will cover all the major areas of everybody's life, and I prompt the group to ask those questions. So
awesome. And so the information, I know some people they sometimes question, I'm in this state, I'm asking this question, am I making this up? But you're not in your thinking mind, right? You're not in beta brainwave. If you're in deep alpha or theta brainwave, you're not in that analytical state, right? And if we really believe that our consciousness is connected to all consciousness of all time, then of course it's natural that we would have a connection to receive that wisdom.
Yeah, people who have studied spiritual and metaphysical literature will know that there's actually only one being in existence in the universe, and all minds are joined, as A Course in Miracles tells us. So each one of us is just an individualized aspect of the one. In terms of not being in your thinking mind, it depends on how deeply you go into trance. Are you in light alpha, deep alpha, light theta? The deeper you go, the less you will be aware of the thinking brain, and you might not be aware of it at all. But there is kind of a gray zone in the middle where you're deep enough to get to the council and hear their answers, but you're not so deep that the thinking mind is completely turned off. So sometimes what will happen is people will be talking to their counsel, and then the egoic portion of the thinking mind starts to express doubt, like, what are you doing? Do you really think that you're talking to non-physical beings? That kind of talk. And if that happens, just ignore it. You don't want to get into an internal debate about the reality of what you're doing while you're doing it, because then you can disrupt the process.
Yeah, indeed. And so the Council of Elders, tell me all about this situation. I want to know, is the Council of Elders, there's one council? Is there a council for each of us? What's the situation with that? I love this, by the way.
I suspect, although I've had no direct contact with them, that there is a council that oversees all the councils. But what I see in my work is everybody has their own council, and there are different numbers of beings on the different councils. Now, sometimes the same being will be on many different people's councils. For example, Jesus is on a number of people's councils. But the council consists of the wise and loving beings who oversee your evolution. They're very highly evolved, very high vibration themselves. They know literally everything about you, everything about the plan for the current life, and everything about every past life you've ever had, past lives on other planets, non-physical lifetimes. So people describe them differently. Sometimes they see them in humanoid form. Sometimes they appear as balls of light that are sort of floating in air. One of the most consistent comments people make, regardless of the form that these beings take, is they'll talk about feeling this tremendous unconditional love radiating from them. And, that's what our non-physical home is like. That's our natural state. But for the average person, since they came into body, this kind of regression is the first experience of that. So it's a reminder of what home is really like. The other comment people make a lot is they'll say things like, I could feel the council's great love for me, and I could tell that they knew everything about me, including all the bad things I've done in my life, but they loved me completely anyway and had no judgment of me. And that is really a homecoming, because that's what the other side is like.
And that's just like totally healing right there, is to be held in loving energy with no judgment, when you have spent your whole life with shame, guilt, blame, hiding.
I mean, what that experience does for people is that it conveys to them experientially that there is literally nothing you can do not to be worthy of love and not to be loved.
Literally nothing.
Literally nothing.
You can do. Totally. Completely. Okay, so further down the rabbit hole of goodness, you've touched on something that's already on my list of questions, because I've been writing my questions down. We can have lifetimes on other planets, other star systems, right? It's not just Earth.
Not only can we do, just about everybody does. So it's not the case for most people that you're just on Earth incarnation after incarnation after incarnation. Generally, you go to other planets or non-physical realms between incarnations on Earth. There are realms that are just pure emotion. There are realms that are mental realms. There are realms of pure thought. I don't know the details of what these realms are like. I haven't made any effort to research them. That's not what I do. But I know that they exist and that most of us go there regularly.
And so are those realms likely more evolved than the human being experience? Please say yes.
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. And so that answers or points to the next question I had, which is, what are we doing hanging out between lives? Like, we don't really understand. We think we have time here, right? On the planet, we understand time. My sense is that time is not a construct outside of this experience, but that we are doing something between these experiences where we're incarnated in physical form.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because in that list of questions that I prompt a group to ask the council when we do it online in a workshop, one of the questions I tell people to ask the council is, what do I do in the time between incarnations, meaning incarnations on Earth? So the answers to that question are just fascinating. And it's pretty much everything you can think of. For example, my grandfather on my mother's side, when he was here in body, he owned a furniture store. He was a furniture salesman. I've spoken to him since he crossed over. I said, what do you do over there? He researches the properties of water. Who would have guessed? I have an uncle who passed away a few years ago. When he was here in body, the only thing he ever wanted to do was go to the racetrack and bet on the horses. That was his great passion in life. He had no interest in anything else. I've spoken to him. I said, what do you do over there between incarnations? He's an intergalactic explorer, the exact opposite of who he was while he was here in body. So it's things like that, fascinating things that you would just never think of. And it's all over the board.
So fascinating. And so then what about, these questions are just all over the show because they're just coming to mind. So what about people are coming, like I have my own viewpoints about this, but I don't want to color it with anything. So I'm just going to try and say it plainly and see what I can learn from you in this, is that some people come to the planet in their incarnation and have a pretty lovely life, and they have experience, they have challenges, and they have the challenges. It's difficult to be human, and we have emotions, and we have thoughts, and some things don't work out the way we want. But some people have traumatic lifetimes, like you look at it and you're like, that's super rough, right? Is it so because of the pre-birth plan? Is it so because of a mix of the pre-birth plan and hangover of energy from a really difficult past life? Is it so because of those things and how we have chosen to use or not use our free will, or learn or not learn in this lifetime? Like, what's your take on that from your experiences?
It's a combination of pre-birth planning and the use of free will after we come into body. So everybody has free will. Your soul knows that you're going to have free will. Your soul wants you to have free will because that's how true learning occurs. You know, if you didn't have free will, then everything would be predestined. We would be nothing more than automatons going through a script. We would never learn anything. So there's this intersection between pre-birth planning and free will. Just to make up a hypothetical example, let's say that somebody's pre-birth plan was to learn to speak up for themselves, stand up for themselves. And so they plan to have a turbulent marriage in which their partner will try to dominate them, but the hope is they will learn to speak up for and stand in their power. So let's say that maybe 5 years before they marry this person, they get a job with an employer who's treating them disrespectfully, unkindly. If they stand up to the employer and say, you may not treat me that way, that's learning the lesson through the use of the free will. So the difficult marriage now never takes place because it's no longer needed. Oh,
okay. So this is very aligned to like my perception of what's happening. But the question I had is when you've got this potentiality. So it literally is the learning of the lesson, and there's going to be opportunities all the way along to be able to do that. That can actually change it's like a recalibration of the GPS, so to speak, right? About how things then unfold based on your use of free will.
Yeah, another way to think of it, one of the mediums who I work with in my books, she says that when she goes into somebody's pre-birth planning session, Spirit shows her something that looks like an incredibly vast and elaborate flowchart. Well, what is a flowchart? It's a series of decision points.
Yes.
If you do A, then X happens. If you do B, then Y happens. This flowchart that Spirit shows her is so vast, it's really beyond human comprehension. That flowchart represents the soul having taken into account the possible free will decisions of the personality at every point throughout the lifetime. So there's a range of possibilities, a very broad range that are possible, and it depends on your free will decisions.
Wow, this is blowing my mind because I've explored like a lot of things about the soul journey and all the things that we're talking about. And I can see the intersection of this and the overlap with numerology and astrology and the Akashic records and all the different things. But there's so many elements of this that are new and exciting that you can understand through this process. So you do this one-to-one with people still, and you also do group workshops, right?
Yeah, there's a group workshop about every 6 weeks. If you go to yoursoulsplan.com, click on events in the main menu, you'll see the whole schedule for the rest of the year. Now, most of the workshops that will happen later this year, we don't have a date set yet, but you can see the ones that are coming up soon. I do still do private sessions. I do 2 every week. And that is actually booked out into February of next year.
It is, sir. I bet it is.
So there's a long wait. And that's one of the reasons why the workshop is a good thing to do, because it really works just as well online and in a group. And then you don't have to wait for 10 months.
Yeah, that's right. And you, from your experience, having taken people through it, you know that people are getting the same kinds of outcomes and results from it. That's wonderful that you can do it that way. And so 2 questions. One is, how long does the workshop run for in terms of like when someone's going into the experience, how long are they in that state where they're actually having their regression?
In both the private session and in the workshop, the between lives regression takes about 2 hours to go through the process, sometimes a little bit longer. I also do workshops that are translated simultaneously into German, Spanish, Polish, for different audiences. If there's a translator involved, then it's a 3-hour process.
Wow, that's so awesome that you can make that available to a broader group of people through the translation service. And tell me, in your experience, why do people come for between lives regressions? Like, what is if you had to say there's like a top 3 to 5 things people are coming looking for, what would you say they are?
Well, there's really just a top 2. The first, number 1 is people who have had something happen. There was some kind of trauma, something really challenging, maybe in the past, maybe going on right now, and they want to understand, why did this happen? What does it mean? How should I respond to it? What are the underlying lessons? The second group is people who are just on a general spiritual exploration, and they feel like this is the next step. So it's not that something has happened recently, but they're just curious. They have a lot of questions, and they want to pose those questions to their counsel.
Okay, perfect. Next question coming out of that is this. People want to know their purpose, right? And we know purpose includes the learning and the facing of the challenges and the evolution and all of that, but people want very specifically to know, but what's my purpose? Like, what am I here to do? Like, what career should I do? Just like you were questioning in your transition out of what you were doing. And you know, I think there are many ways to kind of come at that and piece things together as a jigsaw to see where life is pointing you, whether we're accessing numerology, astrology, different things that are happening. But in between lives regression, can you ask your council of elders specific, like really detailed questions like that? Like, what am I suited to? What am I here to give? What's my contribution?
You can, and most of the questions that people ask, either privately in a private session or in a group, are along those lines. And the question, what is my life purpose? What should I be doing here? That may very well be the number 1 question that is asked. And if it's for your highest good, they will answer it. Now, occasionally, not too often, but occasionally, it's not for somebody's highest good to get an answer to that question or some other question, and the council will simply choose not to respond. But what that means is that it's really important to their learning that they figure it out on their own.
No, I was about to ask you that. Why is it not an highest good? It's not quite time yet to know, or as you said, it's about potentially owning what you, like, for example, somebody might know and they're not trusting themselves to own that or to learn it for themselves. Yeah.
Well, all of those are reasons why the council might not respond, but there's another one you might not think about. So what I found in my research into pre-birth planning is that one of the main reasons people plan challenges is to cultivate what I refer to as divine virtues. These are qualities that are important to their soul. It's things like unconditional love, compassion, empathy, patience, acceptance, faith, trust. We work with a list of 28 or 29 now that have come up the most in people's pre-birth planning sessions. One of the divine virtues is something called self-referencing. Self-referencing means that you planned before you were born. You wanted to come to see yourself as the highest and best source of wisdom and knowledge for you. It doesn't mean you don't consult with others, but if you do, you run it past your own discernment and decide, is it truth for you? So there are some people who are working on becoming more self-referencing, and those people, they get somewhat fewer questions answered by the council, because if that's your pre-birth intention, it places limits on how much the council can tell you.
Yeah. And shout out to the people in my community who are self-referencing on this life journey, and they know it, because I can name a couple of them already, and they'll be like, oh, that's me. Right. And it's that whole process of sometimes, I'm sure you see it with people in the work you do as well, that like they know and they don't trust themselves, or they are looking to someone else to verify, and then they'll follow that advice versus, and I think the self-help industry is a little bit cultivated, unfortunately, a tendency for people to lean on other people's wisdom, when really we've got a compass within that is the primary source of authority or wisdom. I think it's really important to learn from outside sources, but so often I think we do know what it is that we need to do, or we need to learn, or where we need to go, or what we need to do, and it's about like trusting in ourselves.
I think that is a fundamental and vitally important lesson for every single person who incarnates on the earth. I mean, if you go to your council, ask them, what is my life purpose, what I should be doing, and they say something that you've never thought of before, what are you going to do with that? You've got to make a decision now. So unless you've cultivated that self-referencing quality, you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, right, exactly. You wouldn't even trust that you've heard correctly. You wouldn't trust possibly that you've made it up, right? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, another question. What is up with like parallel lives? Is that a happening thing, or are we doing like linear lives? Or because my sense is it's parallel, but we just don't realize it. But then my brain thinks very linear. So how does that? Because lives are informing next lives, right? Like, don't you have a past life and then you do some pre-birth planning and you're accumulating what you need to learn from the past experiences?
Yeah, so this is where the limitations of the human brain start to make things difficult, because when I went into people's pre-birth planning sessions and heard the conversations that had taken place when they planned the current lifetime, there was almost always a lot of reference to one or more past lives on which the current planning was being based. So clearly there's some kind of sequence to those lives. And yet we also know that from the soul's perspective, all the lives are happening now concurrently. Well, how can both of those things be true? That doesn't make sense to the human brain. So I think we just have to accept that this is one of those things we're not really going to understand completely until we get back to the other side.
Yeah.
But in terms of parallel dimensions, parallel lives, my understanding is everybody has at least a few parallel selves in parallel dimensions who made different decisions and are leading somewhat different lives. There's a story like this in my second book, Your Soul's Gift. It's in a chapter on mental illness. And it's about a woman who, she's now middle-aged, but starting in childhood and continuing until just a number of years ago, she had this very unusual form of psychosis in which if she were asleep at night, and let's say she had a nightmare and dreamt that a monster was attacking her, when she woke up in the morning, it would seem to her like the monster was there physically in the room with her, which, as you can imagine, was a horrifying experience. So this went on for decades. It disrupted her life completely. It disrupted her marriage after she got married. So we did a channeling session with Jesus, and we asked him, what is going on here? And what he said is, she has several parallel selves in parallel dimensions who have a lot of unhealed energies that need to be processed. And by going through this unusual form of psychosis, she's processing those energies on behalf of those parallel selves, bringing healing to them. So that's what was going on there. And that revelation completely changed the way she looked at what she had gone through, because previously it had seemed to be totally meaningless suffering, but now she understood what purpose it really served.
And something so significant like that, when we look at life from this perspective of which has such deep meaning, you think, well, how can something so significant and long running have no meaning? So it's just awesome to be able to access wisdom that points to what's really going on. I just love that. So like you could have like other versions of self, of the current like incarnated self, based on different choices you made. That's just like super fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking about like strange moments where you have like not deja vu moments, but like moments where it feels like when you have dreams, sometimes I wonder if some of the dreams that I've had, they didn't really feel like dreams. They felt very real, and they weren't confusing symbology like dreams. They were like very real aspects of life. And I'm like, that kind of feels like if I'd gone down that track. So I guess that's possible, right? Because when we're in dream state, our consciousness could be accessing other.
I think that is what's happening, at least during some dreams, maybe not all, but during some, yeah. Absolutely.
I'm going to look at dreams a little differently now. Okay. That's it. This question, I think you really already answered, but it was to ask you how much, if we pre-plan the challenges, if we pre-plan the potentiality for our contribution and what our gifts about what we're here to be able to do and achieve, how much does free will have reign over that versus, like, I've always felt like it's potentiality and the free will is going to significantly color how that all goes. But I know other people have different viewpoints on that.
Free will makes a huge difference, and it determines whether or not, to a very large extent, whether or not we're going to experience something that was discussed in the pre-birth planning. Now, there are a small number of things that are set in stone that are not affected by your free will. For example, your choice of parents. Once you're born, obviously you can't change who your parents are, so that choice at that point is set in stone. Mm-hmm. Or let's say you plan before you're born to have a handicap that can't be treated by medical science in the time period in which you're incarnating, which is something you would know. Mm-hmm. Then, short of what we call a miracle, you will have that handicap for the duration of that lifetime. Mm-hmm. But these kinds of things that are set in stone are very small in number. The vast majority of things are potentials, and whether or not they actualize depend upon your free will decisions. Think of it this way. Everybody has many pre-birth plans, not just one. And let's say that every pre-birth plan is a sheet of paper. So everybody's got a stack of sheets of paper. The sheets at the top are the highest vibrational life plans. That's where the learning is done mostly through love, peace, and joy, not so much through pain and suffering. At the bottom are the lowest vibrational plans. That's the opposite. The learning is done through pain and suffering, not so much through love, peace, and joy. So what you want is to move up in the stack of sheets of paper and activate the highest possible pre-birth plan. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are a number of ways to do that, but the most powerful way is just to be the most loving person you can be. So anytime you have to make a decision, big or small, ask yourself, what would love with a capital L do now? Whatever that is, if you do that, you move up in the stack of sheets of paper.
Thank you for making that completely accessible to every single person who's listening to this. That it's not like, oh, you need to go and do this thing and you need to do that thing and you need to figure this out. It's just like, no, it's too complicated. It's just be the most loving version of yourself in that moment. Be conscious, ask yourself that question.
It's actually very, very simple. Not necessarily easy, but very simple.
No, yeah, exactly. Great distinction, right? So within one lifetime in our incarnation right now, there are these levels of vibrational plans from I could live this life at this level or I could live this life at this level. And what you're giving us right there is a great simple technique that we can implement to help us live the higher vibrational version of this life plan. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So last couple of questions. When it comes to relationships, right? So we plan our soul contracts and we have certain people we're going to cross paths with, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And our free will is not going to change that from the perspective of core relationships, obviously not blood family, but what about friendships and intimate relationships?
Well, then free will becomes very important. Depending upon the free will decisions you make, you may or may not meet certain people. If it's really important that you meet them, your guides will work overtime to try to steer the two of you together. That's one of the main things that spirit guides do. But your free will is very, very important. There's an interesting kind of relationship called a bump contract. A bump contract is when you contract with somebody else, another soul before you're born, to bump you, so to speak, back onto a path you want to be on if you strayed off that path. So the way that you know you have a bump contract with somebody, it's usually a very intense but very brief relationship that has a profound impact on your life. It sends you in a certain direction. Something like that is very important, that is going to happen, or at least it's very likely to happen if you need it to happen. And again, your guides will work overtime to bring you in contact with that person if you need that.
Okay, now there's I can't stop. There's two more questions.
Right.
And I know that this is, you'll share whatever you know from your experience doing this. And if it's outside that realm, just let me know. So soulmates is, right, everybody wants to know, is there one or can there be multiple from an intimate love relationship point of view?
My understanding is that there are multiple people that you can have that kind of relationship with. And if you think about it, given the size of the Earth's population now, if you're going to be reasonably sure of meeting at least one of those people in an incarnation, there would have to be more than one. There would have to be multiple people just to increase the chances of finding that person. My new book, which came out about a year ago, Your Soul's Love, that book is specifically about the pre-birth planning of challenges in romantic relationships for those who are interested in that subject.
Yeah, I know. I was reading a little bit about that book earlier before we got on the call. That looks fascinating. And then final question, perspective of death and timing of death and reasons for death and etc. in terms of what our understanding is from twin life regressions.
So my understanding is that everybody plans multiple what we call exit points before they come into body. And an exit point is when you transition back into the non-physical realm. You would take an exit point essentially under one of two sets of circumstances. The first is you've learned what you came to learn and you've done what you came to do. In that case, it's time to go home. The second set of circumstances is the opposite of that. The soul concludes, for whatever reason, that the personality will not be able to learn what they came to learn or do what they came to do. And in that case, rather than waste time and energy, the soul will bring the incarnation to an end, and the unlearned lessons will just continue in another lifetime.
Wow. So fascinating. I'm so grateful for this time with you. I'm so grateful for you sharing detailed and really helpful information. I'm sure that people watching this are going to be writing down all the questions, things that they want to learn from you. And so let's talk about how people can benefit from your teaching. So obviously, who wants to wait until February, people? The group workshops sound amazing, right? Because they're coming up. You've got things coming up soon. So I'll just reference some of them, and I'm going to put all the details below on this page. So we're recording this as at early April 2022. On April 24th, you've got a Between Lives Soul Regression online workshop, Discover Your Life Plan. There'll be a link with that. You can register. April 26th, there's a free talk online about why we ourselves plan our big life challenges before we're born. So it'll be really relevant for some people. May 7th, Star Souls online workshop.
Yeah, that is a new offering that both my wife and I are going to teach. She's a channel. She channels a collective of loving beings who exist in unity consciousness that we call the beings of light. And what they have told us is that there are many, many people on Earth who come from distant star systems, usually much more highly evolved than human society. And they have these unique gifts. But because they're so different from other people, they often get lost. They have very challenging lives, especially when they're children, and they may not know what their unique gifts are or how to use them in their life. So this workshop is intended to address those sorts of questions. And what we did in consultation with the beings of light, we modified the induction for the Between Lives regression and changed it around somewhat so that it's now specifically targeted toward star souls and figuring out their origins.
love that. It's so good to see something happening and for that specific group, because people that are that, they know they're that. They know it's for them, right? They immediately resonate with that. Okay, and then May 21st, 22nd, you've got an Awakening to Your Life Purpose, Discovering Your Life Plan online workshop, which also sounds awesome. And then you've got, at any time of year, people can join the Rise to the Path, right? The membership and mentorship program.
Rise to the Path is the monthly membership and mentorship program that my wife and I co-teach. And the focus of Rise to the Path, the stack of sheets of paper that I talked about, the whole focus of Rise to the Path is how do you activate one of those sheets at the top? That's the purpose of that.
Very practical and very relatable. That's brilliant. So if we're looking for ways to actually practically engage with our daily life and move us to that state, that gives people an option of how to work with you to support them to do that. Right, okay, I'm mind blown. I'm going to be reflecting on this all evening here. Thank you so much for your time. And your wife is wonderful as well. She's a really bright light, and it was a pleasure to meet her recently as well. So anyone who's going to be doing that workshop with the two of you will be very lucky. And your website, for people that want to just jump over to the website and have a look, is yoursoulsplan.com.
That's right.
Okay, great. I'll put a link with this so that people can come and find you, and links to your books. Thank you so much for your time, Rob.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Great conversation, great questions.
Yes, I've been saving those questions up for you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.